Hello, welcome to Live with Anton Gunn. It's Wednesday, 2 p.m. East Coast time, 11 a.m. Pacific. To everybody in the Central Time Zone and the Mountain Time Zone, you know it's time to get in where you fit in. I'm excited about being with you again this week. As you can see, I am not in my home office. I'm actually traveling today, and I wanted to do live right from my hotel room to continue on this series of how we talk about leadership lessons through the lens of hip hop music and culture. August is the month that we are celebrating the birth and the anniversary of 50 years of hip hop. August 11, 1973 is the date that we acknowledge as the birth of hip hop. But this whole month, I'm doing a deep dive on different aspects of hip hop music and culture and giving it to you from a leadership lens, giving it to you in a way that you can apply some business principles, some leadership principles to help you to be successful in your life and your career. Now, today, I want to talk about the origin of hip hop music and culture. Last week, I literally talked a whole lot about the legacy of music labels, and I talked about Russell Simmons and Rick Rubin. I talked about Andre Harrell, and I later talked about the legacy of those guys through Sean P. Diddy or Puff Daddy Combs. So today, I want to do the same kind of framework and walk it back to the very beginning and talk about a subject that is really hot and heavy right now. And what do I mean hot and heavy? I'm talking about the subject of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, I know you might be thinking, Anton, I already know DEI. I understand DEI. Well, I'm telling you right now, diversity, equity, and inclusion are under attack. And what do I mean under attack? There's literally been a Supreme Court ruling in the last few months that basically said colleges and universities cannot use diversity as a criteria by which to admit students to school or to deny them admission. So basically, the Supreme Court says we no longer can use diversity. And if you use diversity, you're discriminating against one group versus another. Now, although I totally disagree with the Supreme Court, and when I mean totally disagree, I think it was a bad decision, a decision that is going to have a negative impact long term. I don't want to talk about the negative decision. I don't want to talk about the negative impact. What I am going to talk about is the positive impact that diversity, equity, and inclusion can bring you. So when I say positive impact, I want you to think about this. Whatever you're doing now as a leader, whatever you think your impact is as a leader, if you have a focus on diversity, a focus on equity, and a focus on inclusion, you can increase your impact as a leader. You not only will increase your impact, you will increase your reputation. You will grow your reputation because you have an appreciation for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And above that, if you have a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, you will increase your revenue. That's right. You will increase the amount of money that you can make and earn in your lifetime because you appreciate diversity. Now, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to unpack the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in increasing your reach, increasing your revenue, and increasing your impact. And I'm going to do that through the lens of telling you a hip hop story. And then I'm going to close it out with some key statistics that I want you to understand that industry over industry, diversity has been a bottom line enhancement to those businesses and companies and industries that embrace diversity and inclusion. And so I want you to understand that this is nothing else but about winning. This is about success. If you want success in business and life and leadership, then I want you to understand that you have to have a competency and a skill set in diversity, equity, and inclusion. A competency, which means knowing what to do, and a skill set means knowing how to do it. If you don't have both, it's going to be hard to increase your revenue, your reach, and your impact. But if you do, you will be able to increase all three exponentially and put yourself in a position to have monumental success. So let's jump right into it. Today, I'm going to talk about the birth story of hip hop. See, if you think about the birth story of hip hop, It is a story that is totally rooted in diversity. It's rooted in creating opportunity for different people who have different voices in different ways to play a role in bringing the success to life. It is rooted in diversity. And so let's start at the very beginning. When I say start at the very beginning, let's start with Cindy Campbell and her brother Clive Campbell. Now, Cindy and Clive Campbell, Clive is also known as Kool Herc. If you have paid any attention to the story of hip hop in the year 2023, you would have paid attention to the fact that so many people are giving flowers while he's still here to DJ Kool Herc as the godfather, the father of hip hop music and culture. And they're also giving his sister Cindy her flowers because it was her idea to have a party and call it a back to school jam in the rec room at 1520 Sedgwick Avenue in the Bronx, New York. This party, back to school jam, was where hip hop was born. Now, the reason why I want to raise this story for you about hip hop music and culture starting in the Bronx at 1520 Sedgwick Avenue, because I want you to know Cindy and Clive Campbell were Jamaican Americans. Their parents immigrated from Jamaica. And so already from day one, there was an international element to hip hop music and culture. In the Bronx, New York, two Black immigrants from the Caribbean hosted the first party, as we would call it, that became a hip hop jam. The term hip hop wasn't even created at that point when Cindy and her brother hosted that party where Kool Herc DJ'd. Cindy put together the framework of the party. There was no term hip hop at that point, but that became hip hop music and culture. Now, I'm just starting there to show you that the mindset of hip hop is rooted in inclusion of people from different backgrounds. And when I mean different backgrounds, I'm talking about people from all over the world. And we're going to unpack a little bit of piece of that over the next few minutes. And then I'm going to bring this point forward and talk to you about the reach, the revenue, and the impact of hip hop. So let me jump right into it. Everybody knows that first house party in 1973 was in the Bronx. And if you had lived any part of your life and paid attention to any piece of American history, you know that New York City in 1973 was a city of struggle and challenge, particularly if you were Black or if you were brown. And when I mean brown, I'm talking about my Latino brothers and sisters who also lived in the Bronx. See, the Bronx was a community that was thrown away by most of New York City. A gentleman by the name of Robert Moses built the Cross Bronx Expressway right through some neighborhoods. And on one side of the neighborhood was life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the other side of the neighborhood was poverty, destruction, violence, and every other thing bad that you want to think of, including gangs. And it's in that other side of the neighborhood with the gangs, the violence and the poverty and the destruction, burnt out buildings, is where hip hop was born. See, you had a community of Black and brown folks who lived together and were in the midst of struggle. They were thrown away by society. Poor Black and Latino kids who were told that they weren't anything, that they couldn't be anything, that the school programs were taken away. They took away arts and entertainment from school. They didn't have a lot of opportunity. But these poor Black and Latino kids in the Bronx, New York, were able to create the art form of hip hop. They didn't wallow in their misery. They didn't wallow in their pain. They created something from nothing. And it was the poor Black and Latino kids, largely poor Black and Latino kids, who literally came up with the art form. Again, Cindy and Clive Campbell were part of the first. DJ Grandmaster Flash was also in that group. Grand Wizard Theodore. I can name to you all of the DJs, including Africa Bambaataa, former gang member of the Black Spades, who created the Zulu Nation that became this body of embodiment of hip hop music and culture. Poor Black and Latino kids created the music. They created the graffiti art. They created the dance. They created the rapping. They created every element of hip hop. And they were largely doing it in their own community for each other. And so you had this mix of diversity: Black immigrants, Black native people from the United States, and of course, Latino immigrants, some born right there in the Bronx, others came from Puerto Rico, others came from the Dominican Republic. You had an amalgamation of diversity right there in New York City that created hip hop music and culture. But it doesn't stop there, because the Black and Latino diversity in hip hop wasn't the diversity that made it the worldwide phenomenon that it is today. It took some other people being involved. And the next group of people that I want to talk about is the Jewish community. See, some people don't recognize this, but Jewish people in the United States of America have a long legacy of helping hip hop to become the worldwide phenomenon that it is. I talked to you last week about Rick Rubin, Jewish kid in school at NYU in his dorm room, and he asked his Jewish parents for $5,000 that they gave him that he used to buy music equipment, and he also used it to start Def Jam Records. That's right, Rick Rubin is Jewish. The first rap label in its full scope and scale that has become this worldwide powerhouse of Def Jam Records, Jewish guy. I could even give you other record labels like Tough City Records, who literally was working with the Cold Crush brothers a year before Rick Rubin even founded Def Jam Records. Tough City Records, also founded by a Jewish American who believed that hip hop had something to say and it should be put on a record. I can add to you the Silverstein family, who started Tommy Boy Records. That was the home label for Queen Latifah, for De La Soul at a time, for Africa Bambaataa and the Soul Sonic Force. So many Jewish Americans got themselves involved in hip hop and brought this music from the communities and the parks in the Bronx, New York, and put it on records so that people could buy it and consume it at mass. But it didn't just stop with Jewish Americans contributing to hip hop. And there's a lot more Jewish Americans. I didn't even talk about the Beastie Boys, the first white rap group that had monumental success, touring with Run DMC, touring with LL Cool J, touring with, a Public Enemy, all kinds of great artists. That group, the Beastie Boys, are three Jewish kids from New York. They literally became the greatest band at one time in hip hop because of what they were doing with their music and how they was expanding the scope and scale and the reach of hip hop through the Beastie Boys. But again, it doesn't just stop at the Jewish community. It also moves to the gay and lesbian community. See, when hip hop was uptown in the Bronx or in Harlem, in the places where all of the Black and brown folks hang out, it was a music and a cultural art form where we had our own part jams and we did our own thing and had a great time and really enjoyed ourselves. But it wasn't until those records were brought to the downtown Manhattan club scene that, and when I mean club scene, I'm talking about dance clubs where people just went to go and have a good time and dance. And there was no better music than the late 1970s, early 1980s hip hop music that was so danceable. Those tracks will make you get up and dance. I mean, like if you play Planet Rock right now, you can't help but to dance. That was dance music. Sugar Hill Gang Rappers Delight is dance music. That dance music was put into the clubs and played by many of the downtown DJs. Some of them were members of the gay community and had gay clubs and gay parties, or nights that were at traditional clubs. There was a gay night at a party or at a club. And so what am I sharing with you? I'm sharing with you that the story of hip hop and how it began to grow outside of New York City is a story of diversity and inclusion. Again, Black and Latino kids, immigrants to America, Jewish people, and the LGBTQ community is what brought hip hop together as a conglomerate art form. But it doesn't just stop there, because hip hop was a United States phenomenon. It was music only played in the United States. It was music danced to in the United States. But what made hip hop a worldwide phenomenon was not even the beats and the rhymes, but it was the dancing, the break dancers. When you had the Rocksteady crew, namely, I'm going to name the most famous Rocksteady b-boy ever, and that is Crazy Legs. When Crazy Legs and the Rocksteady crew battled in Lincoln Center in 1981, August 15, 1981, in Lincoln Center, and it was televised. It was on ABC News. That was the first time people around the world saw hip hop dancing, heard the music, and saw the dancing. And what happened next? Those dancers started to travel internationally to breakdance internationally. So if you want to understand what took hip hop to a worldwide phenomenon, it was the breakdancers. It was the b-boys and b-girls that went over the seas to show people how to spin on their back, how to do a windmill, how to pop and lock, how to do all of the things that we know in the phenomenon of b-boy culture or breakdance culture, whatever term you want to use. And guess what? Today, as I talk to you, b-boying is now an Olympic sport. So in the 2024 Olympics in Paris, breakdancers from around the world will be competing for a gold medal to represent their nation. That would not be the case without hip hop. Now, I struggle to see if anybody out there can tell me a music form, a art form that created an Olympic game. I don't know of any. Maybe you know one. I don't really have a clue. But I want you to understand that hip hop music and culture has created an athletic event in the Olympics the same way it's created a worldwide global phenomenon of music. And that worldwide phenomenon was sparked by the dancing, not the rapping, but the dancing. So I want everybody to understand that hip hop is diverse in its fullest form. The artists, the music, the writing, the culture, and the fashion are all global phenomena today because hip hop not only used diversity, but hip hop is diversity. So let me bring it home for you. Let me put this for you in a business context as a leader. I want you to understand this. That hip hop went from nothing. And when I mean nothing, I'm talking burnt out buildings in the Bronx, New York, of kids just playing with old records that their parents weren't using anymore, plugging in the street poles because they didn't have electricity, stealing microphones and DJ equipment from record stores in the blackout in 1974. They went from that to a $10 billion industry in the United States alone. I told you hip hop is global, worldwide, but in the United States alone, hip hop is a $10 billion a year industry. So let me ask you this question. Would you like to build a $10 billion company? How about a $1 billion company? How about a $100 million company? If you want to build that kind of business, you need to understand that it's going to take diversity, equity, and inclusion to do it. It's going to take diverse people. Like, you're never going to come up with the best idea on your own, sitting in a room with people who look like you and think only like you. It is only through the dimensions of diversity that your best ideas will come together. And they won't just come together if you just have the diversity room. You have to be inclusive in how you listen to those voices. I mean, just imagine where hip hop would be today if you had a bunch of people from downtown that says, hey, can you give me your records to play? I want to play them in my gay club. And you said, no, I don't want that kind of diversity. I'm not interested in having the LGBTQ people dance to my music. I'm not interested in that. Or I'm not interested at all in working with a Jewish record label to put my music on wax. Imagine that closed-mindedness. Where would hip hop be today if it was closed-minded? Now, I don't want to put out there that hip hop is perfect and that it's the most progressive and inclusive art form, because it's not. But I will tell you that in the origin of the culture, if it wasn't for that inclusion, if it wasn't for recognizing that anybody could get your music out there for you and that you need to take every channel, we wouldn't be where we are today. But we are because we embraced it. And if you embrace diversity and inclusion as a leader, you're going to increase your impact the same way hip hop has a global impact. You're going to increase your reach because, again, hip hop has reached the entire world if you embrace diversity and inclusion. And yes, you're going to increase your bottom line revenue if you focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, I know you might say, Anton, I don't see how this relates to what I do every day. Let me tell you this. You need to change your mindset about how diversity is a part of your life. There's something that you can learn from people who are different than you. There's something you can get value out of when you put yourself around people who have a different mindset and a different perspective than you. I'm not saying that you have to take everything that they give you or buy into every aspect of their lives, but there's something that you can learn. There's an appreciation that you can gain by understanding the value of diversity and inclusion. And that's what hip hop has taught me. Now, I'm going to close with this main financial point for all of the business people out there who think that diversity and inclusion needs to go away, that we shouldn't be focused on this. I'm going to tell you this. If you look around industry upon industry, the companies and the businesses that are the most successful that they can be are the ones who embrace diversity. I'm going to use two examples. The first one is Apple. Now, I'm an Apple user. I'm doing this live on an Apple product right now. I got an Apple phone. I got an Apple Watch. My wife has an Apple computer. She has an iPhone. So does my daughter. We're an Apple family. Don't come at us with none of that Android stuff. Not trying to hear it. But here's what I want you to understand about Apple. Have you ever been in an Apple store? Matter of fact, if you have an Apple store in your city right now, I challenge you to just get in your car and go down and sit outside of the Apple store and watch who comes in and out of that store. First of all, I'm going to tell you the store is going to be crowded no matter what. It's always going to be crowded. I've never seen an empty Apple store. Even in the pandemic, I didn't see an empty Apple store. I saw a long line trying to get in to that Apple store. But what I'm saying to you is this. The reason why the Apple store is full, the reason why the Apple store is so crowded is because the people who work for Apple look like the customers who shop at Apple. If you look at the employees in the Apple store, they reflect the diversity of their customers because Apple understands that everybody can get an iPhone. I don't care what you look like. I don't care your race, your background, your religion, your sexual orientation, your gender identity. If you want an iPhone, you can use an iPhone. And they make it so that it's inclusive, even for persons who have disabilities. Most people have no idea the disability settings that exist within an iPhone that you can use if you're hearing impaired, if you're visually impaired. Apple is an inclusive company. I'm not saying that they're doing everything right, but I know this. I see the dimensions of diversity when I go to an Apple store. I see the dimensions of diversity when I go to an Apple website or the Mac website. I see the dimensions of diversity. And because of it, Apple is one of the top 10 companies in the United States of America. And yes, they do sell Apple products worldwide. They don't have a closed off mindset to say, I don't want to do business with you. Now, let me go back to that Supreme Court case. Y'all remember the Supreme Court case that literally shut the door on diversity in higher education was about a woman who wanted to have a company that builds websites, but didn't want to build websites for a gay couple. She wanted to be able to discriminate, in my words, that she didn't want to build a website for a gay couple because she doesn't support gay marriage. Okay? That's her right. I guess it's her right. Now the Supreme Court said it's her right and her ability to do that. But could you imagine saying that I don't want to make money in my business? I don't want to make money from people who want to pay. They didn't ask her to do anything illegal, unethical. Apple will sell a phone to everybody. So my context for you is to understand that you got to embrace diversity. Let me give you one other company example, and that's Amazon. Amazon is a global business, a very big business, because they will ship products to you wherever you are. They don't make a decision, say, you know what, I'm not going to South Central Los Angeles because that's the hood. I'm not going to Ingleside in Norfolk, Virginia because that's the hood. They didn't say that. You got an address, they will find a way to get it to you. And if they can't get it all the way to the neighborhood, they'll get it to a place where you can get to it. There's a big context around this framework of diversity and inclusion and how valuable it is. So I want everybody to understand that those are two examples. But let me just close it out with this. And I'm going to dive one last nugget point. There's a company called McKinsey. If you haven't heard of it, it's a global consulting firm. They do research year after year after year on all kinds of trends that are going globally around the world. They look at inside of industries and they look outside of industries. And McKinsey completed a study in 2014 after looking at 5,000 companies around the world, 5,000 companies around the world. And here's what they found: that companies that had women in the C-suite of the company and on the board, the corporate board, if they had women in the C-suite and on the corporate board, those companies had a 15% higher revenue, profitability than all of the competitors within their industry. So again, you're competing against another company. Y'all are equal, but that company has women in the C-suite and women on the board. Well, they have a 15% higher profitability than your company does because they have women in the C-suite and on the board. 15%. Diversity pays. But let me add on top of that. If those same companies had ethnic diversity, so think race and ethnicity in the C-suite and on the boards, if there was race and ethnicity diversity in the C-suite on the board, those companies had a 33% higher profitability than all of their industry competitors. So my context for you is to understand that diversity pays. It pays. And I know there's a lot of companies who are trying to figure out what to do next on this diversity, equity, and inclusion stuff. Here's what I'm going to tell you. First thing you need to do is you need to go to antongunn.com/toolkit and download my toolkit. I have a Just Lead toolkit for leaders to help them to understand the keys to being successful, to be a world-class leader. So download the Just Lead toolkit, antongunn.com/toolkit. That's the first step. The second thing you need to do is you need to continue to diversify your company at the senior leadership levels on the corporate side. You need to think about who's on your corporate board. So if you don't have women and people of color on your corporate board, you're on your way to a place where you won't win in business. But if you do, you're on your way to dominating your industry. The third thing you need to do is to diversify your C-suite. I am a former C-suite executive at a large organization. I was the first person of color in the boardroom or around the executive table. Now, what I want you to understand is that I'll never forget what the CEO said to me when I was in a meeting around that executive table. He says, Anton, the reason why you're here is because you think differently than everybody in this room. You see our work from an angle that I never thought of and nobody else around the table talks about. And because of that, we got better as an organization. So I want you to understand that diversity is a mindset. It's not about just the physical attributes or the racial complexion of my skin. All of those things add dimensions, but diversity is a mindset. So how do you surround yourself with people who have totally different experiences than you, who see the world in a different way, who have a different analysis than you have? If you find a way to do that, you're going to build a business that allows you to have greater reach, greater revenue, and a greater impact. That has been my experience. That comes from the organizations that I've worked with professionally and as a consultant and as a speaker, that if you find a way to embrace diversity the same way hip hop has embraced diversity and inclusion, you will have a massive and monumental impact. So I want to give you that message today. Go study the origin of hip hop. If you want to get some more context to this story, I want to shout out a series on Netflix called The Get Down. If you're a Netflix subscriber, I encourage you to watch all of the episodes of The Get Down in season 1. It'll give you the context of that hip hop story that I just showed you. It's not 100% accurate, but it's accurate enough to give you a sense of how this thing that we call hip hop, that has changed the world over and over and over again and still does to this day, was all started because there's belief in the value of diversity. So I want to thank you for watching. Everybody have a fantastic day, and I'll catch you next Wednesday, 2 p.m. East Coast time, 11 a.m. Pacific. Have a great week.